Hi, I'm Kiran Mazumdar Shaw, and it is such a delight to really be speaking to a very dear friend, Azra Raza, who has really written a remarkable book called The First Cell and the Human Costs of Pursuing Cancer to the Last. What an apt title, because she's spoken about a topic that every one of us ought to be discussing. And for me, as someone who's really deeply kind of invested in cancer research and developing cancer drugs, I couldn't agree with Azra more than what she has expressed in this book of hers. Um, for every one of us, I think cancer is a very dreaded word. The C word is still a very dreaded word because, we just feel that whenever anyone is diagnosed with cancer, the prognosis is always so daunting. And it's always something that leads to a sense of hopelessness. So I think I'd like to start by asking Azra this question as to what made you really write such a book? Because I think what you've really spoken about in this book is something everyone wants to know at every stage of the disease.
Thank you so much, Kiran. It's such an honor to be on any stage with you, but particularly talking about medicine, cancer, patients, the future of drug development in this area. It is really an honor. I'd like to say just a couple of words about my background, and so that I can tell people why, answer Kiran's question appropriately, which is why I wrote this book. Well, why I wrote this book is because I suppose I have three credentials that gave me the courage to put pen to paper. The first is that I am a practicing oncologist in New York City at Columbia University, and I see 30 to 40 cancer patients every week. And I've been doing that for more than 3 decades. Second is that I have a cutting edge basic research lab where we do translational research in cancer, which means we are trying to develop biologic insights into cancer as a disease and convert it into improved therapies for patients. So I'm an oncologist, I'm a cancer researcher, and my third credential is that I'm a cancer widow, that I lost my own husband, who was the head of the cancer center at the university in Chicago, developed the very disease he was trying to cure all his life, leukemia, and died of it in the prime of his life. Diagnosed when my daughter was 4 years old and died when she was 8. So I've had the misfortune of looking at cancer from both sides of the bed as a caregiver and a caretaker as well. And Kiran, I have to say to you that the single most frustrating thing to me is that I came to America in 1977 and immediately started treating and studying patients with acute myeloid leukemia. And I was treating them with two drugs, popularly known as 7 and 3, because one chemotherapy is given for 7 days, another for 3 days. Do you know, Kiran, that in 1977 I was giving these drugs? Today in 2021, that remains the only treatment. The first line treatment for acute leukemia is still 7 and 3. If patients fail that, it's bad news for them. So just think, Kiran, of how many thousands of patients have I seen in these last 3 decades and had the same conversation about the dreadful toxicities of these agents, the dreadful results of them. And yet the tragedy is that if I had acute leukemia today, I would take the same drugs. Because what do I have to lose? What is the alternative? Death. At least this gives me a 26% chance of surviving for a few years, with horrible effects, of course. So this is what finally forced me to take the blinders off my eyes and try to look at How long can we continue to pretend blindness, and how much effort are we investing in not seeing what is in front of our eyes, which is that we are still using slash, poison, burn to treat cancer? Why?
But Azra, let's also now dwell upon the hopeful side. You yourself are a translational researcher, and we do know that there's a lot of very interesting findings in recent times which give us hope that cancer treatment is getting better, is getting more sophisticated, is getting more targeted, is getting to be more personalized, and the outcomes are getting better. So what I also wanted to ask you was that you have this fascinating hypothesis, and it's not just hypothesis. I mean, there is a scientific um, rationale to what you're saying. And that is that if you actually are able to diagnose the first or early cells which are cancerous, then you can actually treat them early and almost cure cancer immediately without it spreading. And I think that is a very, very hopeful sign, because I agree with you. The problem is that by the time cancer is diagnosed, it has manifested in a much worse way and in a much more prolific way than when if you were to detect it at a very early stage. So I think the technology today has to focus on that early stage of detection and diagnosis, which I think can actually give a lot of hope to cancer patients, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, Kiran. And that is the whole point of the book, that we have spent 50 years in trying to chase down every last cancer cell and kill it. And we have not been terribly successful. Now, I want to make sure everyone understands that 2/3 of cancers diagnosed today are cured. But cured with what? The same slash poison burn, surgery, radiation, chemotherapy. So where has all that investment of $250 billion gone in research? Why don't we have new drugs and new ways of treating cancer? And the 1/3 that present with advanced cancer, their treatment outcome is no better than it was by and large in 1930. This is the point, that end stage cancer is very hard to treat, and it's the only good news we can give cancer patients when they're diagnosed is, well, your disease was diagnosed early, so we can help. So, well, I'm saying, how early? Why is stage 1 the earliest? Why not keep going back to the first cell when the disease is about to begin, and eliminate the first cell so that we prevent cancer entirely? And the hope, Kiran, that you talked about is what I'm living on, and waiting to see this paradigm shift completely. The idea is that instead of waiting for cancer to declare itself, we find it before it becomes cancer. How do we do that? Monitor wellness to find illness. Don't wait for cancer to become apparent. Start treating the human body like a machine, and 24 hours constantly monitor it for the appearance of disease perturbation networks. Given the sophisticated technology that we have today, we should be able to get the footsteps of cancer before it even becomes cancer. My whole idea is that, look, cancer doesn't arise out of nowhere suddenly one day. It just doesn't. The organ where cancer is arising, let's say the liver or lungs or prostate or breast, they are under stress for a while, whether it's stress from hormones, from infections, from exposure to toxins. Whatever it is causing stress in the organ, and the organ cells are getting signals to either fight or flight. You're either going to die or develop some strategy to survive. And one cell then develops a strategy to survive forever. And to me, Kiran, think of it. Within our body is one cell that has found the secret to living forever. In other words, once we unlock the secret of cancer, we'll unlock the secret of aging. We can live forever. And it's that intellectual fascination for me that first started me even to study cancer. So what I'm saying now, and in the book I've said, is don't wait for cancer to appear, go after the first cell, first in people who are at high risk of cancer, like somebody who's born with the mutation in BRCA1 or 2 genes, or somebody who's born with Lynch syndrome, or one of these genetic mutational diseases that put us at high risk of cancer. Another is people who have smoked a lot and have lung disease already. They are at high risk of cancer. We can start by monitoring them and wait for the appearance of first cell and catch it and see how it appeared. And then once we understand what are the footsteps of cancer, even before it becomes the first cell, just the organ that's under stress, what are those stress signals, then we can go and monitor the whole population, and no one has to be scared about getting a diagnosis of cancer, because we will find it at such an early stage that we can fix it right there and then. That is the only way to deal with this problem, and that's where technology is taking us. And I want to hear from you, because you are developing great technologies that can target single cells. So we need Biocon technology to help us take care of the first cell. So why don't you talk for a few minutes about it, Kiran?
So, Azra, you really opened up a very fascinating topic. And that's about how do you diagnose using all the modern technologies and tools that we have. So whether it is genomics or whether it is kind of tracking cascade signals, or whether it is basically looking at biomarkers, etc., etc. And of course, now imaging technologies are also becoming very, very efficient. So I just think that we have to basically use technology very wisely. As imaging technologies certainly are really, advancing by leaps and bounds because of machine learning and because of various data science principles. And so that is becoming a very fascinating area. Equally, I think your reference to mutations is becoming very important as a subject for cancer. But I think the big challenge we have is that human beings are not ready to be, let's put it this way, diagnosed routinely. We are not creatures of that kind of good habits. We are creatures of, convenience to us and what we want of ourselves. And I think the biggest fear I feel that most people have is, look, I'm feeling fine. Why do I want to go and test myself and then find out that there's something wrong with me? Yeah. So there's that psychological barrier that we have to overcome. Totally. And I think a lot of cancer patients actually suffer from this psychological barrier, saying, even if they notice something which is worrying, like say an ulcer in your mouth that that persists and it hasn't gone away, or like in the case of my husband, who had a very bad sore throat for months and thought that it was just a lingering, flu, and things like that. I think people at large don't want to diagnose and find out that they have cancer.
Yeah.
So I think our first challenge is, how do you make cancer diagnosis a routine, kind of a habit? And also it has to be non-invasive. Because the moment you make it an invasive procedure, people fear it. They don't want to do it anymore. So if you tell people that, oh, by the way, it might involve a biopsy, they don't want to go anywhere near it.
Yeah.
And I know that even mammograms, women hesitate to go and take their annual mammograms just because it's so uncomfortable and they don't like it. So I think we have to start developing diagnostics that are non-invasive, that are easy to do, and that must be done routinely. And I think the way we have to, appeal to the good senses of people is to basically tell them about what these new technologies can do and how it is important for people to diagnose the first cell, as you very rightly call it, Because if you do diagnose that first cell, you know, um, cancer is so easy to overcome. But I think people do need to realize that if you leave it for too long, it just becomes unmanageable. And then the prognosis is so severe and so sad because, you know, very often you hear of someone being given 6 months or 3 months or a year at most because it has advanced so much. So I think, you know, I'm also very excited with immunotherapy because, as you know, the immune system is a fascinating system. I mean, the way it works is just amazing. I mean, it is so complex. And as you yourself said, that, you know, when the cell figures out how to basically defy cell death, that's when it becomes cancerous. And when you are able to basically find out which that cell is, I think that would be the day you will actually be able to diagnose and treat and cure cancer very easily. So I think we have to remain hopeful because I think technologies are, you know, developing at a very rapid pace. As I said, you know, the immune system is an amazing system because today we know that you can't be targeting the immune system one uh, immune agent at a time. I mean, it's got to be a kind of a multiplexed approach. And then that becomes very, very complex and very expensive. So obviously, people are trying out, you know, bispecifics and trispecifics, and they're trying to latch on to different parts of the immune system to get an immune response. Because at the end of it, the moment the body is taught to recognize a cancer cell as an alien cell, or you know, as it is today meant to recognize the COVID virus as an invader, and then it launches that sort of defense against the cancer cell like it would a virus, then I think you know, we also have some hope in getting rid of many of these cancers. But the trick is to find it early because no immune system can deal with a huge burden of cancer. It can probably deal with a much lower burden of cancer and do it well. But if you don't detect it early enough and the burden keeps growing, then it's very difficult for any immune system to fight it. So you might buy a little bit of time, but you won't buy a whole lot of time. And I think that's where the challenge has to be thrown to the pharmaceutical industry. Because today, I think we are developing drugs that just give you very short leases of life. And that's not good enough. I mean, for the kind of money you're investing and paying for these kind of treatments, it's just not fair that you buy just a few weeks or a few months. You need to buy many, many years of quality life. And I think that's what I think we should be aiming towards. Like, how do you basically, you know, survive cancer, like you would say, live your life with diabetes or live your life with any of these chronic diseases without feeling threatened as we do today? Because today cancer is life threatening in many, many ways, psychologically, you know, of course, in terms of metabolically, and of course in terms of the disease itself, you know, that it is a very devastating disease. So I think we need to basically look at all the advances that we're doing in research, and we have to multiplex it because today I think information technology is also very, very powerful. It allows us, you know, quantum biology today is allowing us to do many things that we couldn't do before. And is that something which we can now look forward to when it comes to early detection and even working out what would be the best treatment for such a patient? Because today, I think we get very rigidly bound into certain protocols, I feel, just because we haven't tried something different. I don't know what your views are on that.
Thank you for your many very interesting comments, Kiran. First thing I'd like to say is that I'm always struck that as human beings, whatever little knowledge we have, we think it explains everything. in fact, most of what explains everything is all that we don't know. So for the immune system, for example, we don't know even the tip of the iceberg. And yet we are so arrogant. We think we are going to target these cells and kill this or kill that. Well, CAR T cells have been there for 10 years. What else have we cured? What have we cured except one type of cancer, which is B cell, any cancer with B cell, a very small percentage of those patients, and huge financial and even huger physical toxicities. And maybe 7,000 patients are even eligible for it, whereas 1.5, 1.8 million patients are being diagnosed. So the kind of arrogance, the kind of hyperbole that we use to describe a tiny bit of success. In fact, whereas most of the things we have no idea about. So I have no hope that we'll understand the immune system at any great depth in the next 50 years. What I have great hope with is that we learn from this experience. And what we learn from this experience is basically that I can summarize it like this. You and I just had lunch. I don't have to understand every tiny bit of my digestive system's work protocol in order to enjoy my dal and sabzi that we just ate. I don't have to understand every detail of cancer. I just have to catch it early. That's what I'm saying, that yes, it's a good thing to try and understand biology, but for God's sake, what the last 50 years has taught us is the moment we start trying to get deeper, the farther you go out into the sea, the deeper it gets. It doesn't answer questions, it opens more questions and more questions and more questions. So let's accept that. It's very complicated. And yes, in the next 100 years, we may make some waves, but right now, too many people are dying. And that's what's bothering me, because I want to be a patient advocate. I want to speak from the bedside. I want to be the voice of people who are dying with horrible pain today. If they're dying today, at least what is the short-term solution for it? What the kind of solution that comes from using AI and using the latest of biotechnology to understand and unravel every single signaling pathway of 1 trillion molecules in a single cell. It's going to be a long time. Let's do that, but then let's incentivize financially the goal of finding the first cell. Right now, we are putting no money in it. All the money is going to treating the last cell. 95% is going to try to find some targets and then building therapies for those targets, all for the end stage. I'm saying financially incentivize, as you said, Kiran, the diagnostic aspect of finding the first cell. Then you'll see the smartest minds will turn around, because that's where the money is, and they will develop the diagnostics so quickly. And I can tell you, I'm working with biomedical engineers at Columbia University for several years now. And we are trying to develop a chip that can be inserted under the skin at birth that will constantly monitor for the first cell. You don't even have to be aware of it. And you have a device like this, which has an ultrasound built into it. And all you have to do is pass that device and see how many cells have collected that are abnormal. I mean, these are the kinds of next gen technology that we are developing, that you will not in the near future, you won't have to even think about mammograms and PET scans and doing all these kinds of things. Why? Because we are going to be monitoring the body constantly through techniques that will build like petabytes of data in iClouds on every individual's head, which will be handled by a cell phone. And here I want to tell you one thing, Kiran. I'm from Pakistan. Last time I was in Karachi, you know what happened to me? I was stuck in a traffic jam. And as soon as you're stuck in a traffic jam, the beggars come and start banging on your window. So one beggar was banging constantly on the car window asking for money. And I was told by people sitting, you have come from America, don't wind down your window, please, just stay calm, don't even look at him. But I was looking at him, and suddenly his cell phone rang. The beggar had a cell phone. He picks up the phone and he answers it, and he started looking worried. So now I did wind down my window and I said, Khairiyat hai, what happened? He goes, no, he looked very worried, Kiran. And he said, no, it was my wife. She's saying the traffic jam is larger at the University Road. I should come there. I should take a cab and go there. Now, BBG, tell me, how do I find a cab to go there? So, do you see that everybody has this little device now? In this little device, we can build the technology to find the first cell. I am so confident of it. I'm so excited about it because I think that once the smart minds are given a new goal, they'll do it.
I think what you said is so fascinating, Azra, and it's in your inimitable style that you just sort of convey this opportunity in such an amazing way. So I agree with you. It's about early stage and not end stage. That's what we need to diagnose.
Yeah.
And if you keep diagnosing end stage, then you're obviously there's no hope. But early stage diagnosis is going to give us a lot of hope. And you very rightly, described that device as something that is such a powerful little computer.
Yeah.
That you can actually do such amazing things with it. And I'm delighted to hear that, at your research center at Columbia, you're actually looking at some of these things, like you mentioned about the chip.
Not only looking, we have an M chip. It's sitting right behind you, actually, on my shelf.
Oh, wow.
The chip has already been approved by the FDA for PSA testing. All men have to do is prick their finger, and a drop of blood goes there. It reads your PSA through a device like this. And you can do this 10 times a month if you want. So men can keep track. And we are just going to start putting more and more biomarkers on the same M chip that you can sit at home, test for ovarian cancer, lung cancer, stomach cancer. This is how easy it's going to be. No one has to be scared anymore, like you were saying. No one has to. And the other thing is that because we are going to detect it early, you don't have to fear the kind of anticipation and anxiety that it provoked to go and get a mammogram or get a PET scan and now wait and see, oh, there's a lesion, now I have to do a biopsy, figure out what it is. We're going to make it all so much easier. That's what you were saying earlier, Kiran, that we have to make it non-invasive, non-anxiety provoking, easy, so that people are not just afraid of diagnosis simply because they know there's a treatment. If I'm diagnosed, there's something that can be done about it. And that's the mindset.
Well, on that very, very hopeful note, Azra, this has been an amazing conversation. I think everyone listening to this conversation is going to feel extremely excited with what research has to offer, what technology has to offer. But more than anything, I think cancer patients will also have a lot of reassurance that, things are advancing at a pace and a scale that could never have been imagined before. And that, cancer is something that need not really be such a daunting and devastating disease that it obviously is for so many patients and their families. So I would like to say that all of us, I think every one of us has been through cancer in some form, either personally or, friends or family, but we've all seen it at very close quarters. And I think for all of us, I think we just want this disease to have cures, to have better outcomes, and to basically, have an opportunity to extend life in a way that doesn't really daunt you anymore. So I think that's what we're looking forward to. And from what you say, I think gives us all a great deal of hope.
Thank you so much, Kiran, for taking the time with me. I'd like to end with a couple of lines from Emily Dickinson, who says, "A word is dead when it is said, some say. A word is dead when it is said, some say. I say it begins to live that day." Let
Beautiful.
our word of the first cell live from today on until we realize the dream. Thank you so much, Kiran.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Azra. It's
Thank
been a
you.
pleasure and an honor.
As always, Khuda Hafiz. Thank you.
Thank you.